What would you do if your wealthy in-laws threw you out while you were pregnant, leaving you with nothing but heartbreak and an old key in today's unforgettable story? Thrown out by her in-laws while pregnant, one desperate woman returns to Grandpa's hidden house, believing it's her last refuge. But what she discovers inside isn't just an old family secret. It's a hidden truth, powerful enough to expose betrayal, rewrite her future, and reveal that her husband's death may not have been an accident. Stay with us until the very end, because every clue matters, and the final revelation will change everything you thought you knew. The rain came down in relentless sheets the night Emily Carter was forced out of her late husband's family estate. Thunder rolled across the Cascade Mountains, shaking the sky as if nature itself mourned the cruel twist her life had taken. 8 months pregnant and emotionally shattered, Emily sat behind the wheel of her aging sedan, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She watched the grand stone mansion slowly disappear in her rearview mirror, each passing mile carrying her farther away from the life she had once believed would last forever. Only 6 months earlier, everything had seemed perfect. She had married Nathan Brooks, the beloved heir to one of Oregon's most influential real estate families. Their wedding had been the talk of Portland society, a glamorous celebration where wealth, prestige, and promise appeared to unite into the perfect fairy tale. Nathan had always assured Emily that his parents would eventually accept her humble upbringing. Whenever she worried about the cold stares or whispered comments, he would smile, kiss her forehead, and tell her, "Give them time. They'll see the woman I fell in love with." But time never gave them that chance. 3 months ago, a police officer appeared at their front door carrying news that destroyed everything Emily had ever dreamed of. Nathan had died instantly in a tragic car accident while driving home through a violent storm. There had been no final goodbye, no chance to tell him she loved him one last time, only unbearable silence. From that day forward, the Brooks family looked at Emily differently. Her mother-in-law blamed her for distracting Nathan. Her father-in-law treated her like an unwelcome guest who no longer belonged under their roof. Every dinner became painfully quiet. Every glance carried accusation instead of sympathy. The child growing inside her, once celebrated as the family's future, suddenly became little more than a legal complication. That evening, everything finally collapsed. Her father-in-law calmly informed her that Nathan had left no updated will. The family's attorneys had already prepared documents that would provide financial support for the baby, but only if Emily surrendered major parental rights and agreed to live under their supervision. They called it protection. Emily recognized it for what it truly was: control. When she refused, civility vanished. Her mother-in-law exploded with years of resentment, accusing Emily of marrying Nathan for money and destroying their son's future. Within minutes, security guards escorted her through the front door into the pouring rain while a single suitcase landed at her feet. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind her without a second thought. Now, abandoned and with nowhere left to go, Emily drove toward the only place that had ever offered unconditional love. Her grandfather, Benjamin Hayes, had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving behind an old Victorian farmhouse hidden deep within the forests outside the small town of Silver Creek. The property had remained empty ever since, forgotten by almost everyone. Emily hadn't returned since his funeral. Life, marriage, and endless family obligations had kept her away, until fate left her with no other refuge. Lightning flashed across the dark sky as she turned onto the narrow country road. The familiar route slowly emerged through the rain. Every bend awakened childhood memories she had buried for years. She passed an abandoned grain mill, crossed a weathered wooden bridge, and finally reached the long gravel driveway leading toward the farmhouse. The house appeared like a forgotten relic standing against the storm. Its once white paint had faded into gray. Ivy climbed across the porch columns, while wildflowers and weeds had swallowed the neglected garden. Yet one thing remained unchanged, the enormous maple tree where her grandfather had built a swing decades ago. Even after years of neglect, it still stood proudly, refusing to surrender to time. Emily parked the car and rested both hands on her swollen stomach as her unborn daughter kicked gently. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't certain she believed the words herself. "I promise I'll keep us safe." With great effort, she climbed the creaking porch steps, carrying her worn suitcase through the cold rain. Instinct guided her toward an old stone lantern beside the front steps. Kneeling carefully, she reached beneath it and smiled through her tears as her fingers touched a rusty key, exactly where Grandpa had always hidden it. The front door groaned loudly as it slowly swung inward. A wave of cool, dusty air drifted into the night, carrying the familiar scent of cedar wood, aged books, and forgotten memories. Moonlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating furniture draped in white sheets and faded family photographs hanging silently on the walls. For the first time in months, Emily felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. She had no idea that beyond those silent rooms and hidden deep within the attic waited a mystery that would transform not only her own destiny, but expose a secret powerful enough to rewrite her grandfather's forgotten legacy forever. Morning sunlight filtered through the dusty farmhouse windows, painting long golden streaks across the worn hardwood floors. Emily woke slowly on the faded living room sofa, every muscle in her body aching from the restless night. Her unborn daughter shifted inside her, reminding her that despite everything she had lost, she still had someone depending entirely on her. She pushed herself upright and looked around the silent house. In daylight, the farmhouse felt less frightening and more familiar. Every corner carried memories of childhood summers spent with her grandfather, Benjamin Hayes. She could almost hear his deep laugh echoing through the hallway, smell the blueberry pancakes he made every Saturday morning, and picture him sitting beside the stone fireplace, patiently teaching her how to solve mechanical puzzles. "He always said every problem has an answer," Emily whispered as she rested a hand against her belly. "We just have to find it." She spent the morning exploring each room. The kitchen appeared untouched, as though Benjamin had simply stepped outside for a walk instead of passing away 5 years earlier. A chipped coffee mug still rested beside the sink. His favorite cast-iron skillet hung neatly above the stove. Dust covered every surface, yet nothing seemed disturbed. The study remained exactly as she remembered. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with engineering manuals, history books, astronomy journals, and notebooks written entirely in her grandfather's neat handwriting. Benjamin had never attended a prestigious university, yet everyone in town had admired his brilliant mind. He could repair almost anything from antique radios to complicated engines with little more than patience and determination. As Emily traced her fingers across the books, an old memory surfaced. "Knowledge is the only treasure nobody can steal," her grandfather had once told her. At the time, she had thought he was simply sharing another life lesson. Now those words felt strangely important. Upstairs, Emily entered Benjamin's bedroom for the first time since his funeral. The room remained frozen in time. His neatly folded quilt covered the bed. His reading glasses still rested on the nightstand beside a worn leather journal and an antique silver pocket watch. She picked up the watch carefully. Its elegant cover bore intricate engravings of stars and geometric patterns unlike anything she had ever seen. When she pressed the release button, the lid sprang open with a soft click. The hands had stopped permanently. 7:42. Emily frowned. According to the death certificate, Benjamin had suffered a fatal heart attack while working in his garden shortly after sunrise. Why had his watch stopped exactly 2 minutes later? "It can't be a coincidence," she murmured. Before she could think further, 3 sharp knocks echoed from downstairs. Her heart skipped, carefully making her way down the staircase. Emily looked through the front window and recognized an elderly woman standing on the porch, balancing a warm casserole dish in her hands. The moment the woman smiled, recognition flooded back. "Mrs. Harper." The elderly neighbor laughed warmly. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever come home, child." Emily opened the door. Mrs. Margaret Harper, now well into her 80s, stepped inside as though she had visited yesterday instead of years ago. Her silver hair was tied neatly beneath a knitted scarf, and despite her age, her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. "You've gotten far too thin," Margaret declared before Emily could speak. "Pregnant women need real food." Within minutes, the older woman had reheated the casserole and insisted Emily eat every bite. As they talked, Emily briefly explained everything that had happened: the accident, the hostility from her in-laws, and being forced out with nowhere else to go. Margaret listened quietly. When Emily finished, the elderly woman nodded as though she had expected every word. "Benjamin always believed you'd come back someday." Emily looked up in surprise. "He said that—" Margaret nodded. "He asked me to keep an eye on this house. Told me never to let anyone disturb it until you returned." A chill crept down Emily's spine. "Why me?" Margaret hesitated. "Because your grandfather knew someone would eventually come looking for what he left behind." Emily stared in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Margaret glanced toward the hallway as though making certain they were alone. "There were men asking about this property long before Benjamin died," she said quietly. "They drove expensive black cars, wore tailored suits, never introduced themselves. They'd park on the road for hours, taking photographs of the farmhouse." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. "What were they looking for?" "I don't know," Margaret sighed. "But Benjamin warned me they would never stop searching." Silence settled between them. Finally, the elderly woman reached into her purse and handed Emily a folded business card. "One more thing." She lowered her voice. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions. If you ever return to this house, I was to tell you to contact his attorney immediately." Emily unfolded the card. "Daniel Brooks, attorney at law." Before leaving, Margaret paused at the front door and looked directly into Emily's eyes. "There are things your grandfather never told anyone." She smiled sadly. "And I believe you're about to discover why." Emily closed the door behind her, suddenly aware that the farmhouse no longer felt like a simple refuge from heartbreak. It had become the entrance to a mystery her grandfather had spent a lifetime protecting. The farmhouse felt different after Margaret Harper left. What had once seemed like a quiet refuge now carried an unsettling sense of purpose. Every creaking floorboard, every dusty photograph, every locked cabinet seemed to whisper that Benjamin Hayes had been living a life far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her grandfather had been trying to tell her something, determined to uncover the truth. She returned to the attic just before sunset. The hidden wooden chest remained exactly where she had found it, behind the false wall, its dark, polished surface glowing faintly beneath the beam of her flashlight. She knelt carefully, supporting the weight of her pregnancy, and studied the unusual locking mechanism once again. Ainus. Instead of a traditional keyhole, several concentric brass rings surrounded the center of the lid. Tiny engraved numbers and strange geometric symbols circled each ring, forming a puzzle unlike anything she had ever seen. "This wasn't built by a carpenter," Emily whispered. "It was designed by an engineer." She slowly rotated each ring, experimenting with different combinations. Nothing. She tried her grandfather's birthday. Nothing. Her grandmother's anniversary. Still nothing. Nearly an hour passed before frustration forced her back downstairs. If you loved puzzles so much. She sighed toward the ceiling. You certainly didn't make this one easy. Back in the study, Emily searched through Benjamin's enormous collection of books, hoping to find some kind of clue. Most contained technical notes, sketches, and mathematical equations she barely understood. Then one familiar title caught her attention. Journey to the Center of the Earth. It had been Benjamin's favorite novel. He used to read it aloud every summer while Emily sat beside him on the porch swing. Fascinated by stories of hidden worlds beneath the earth, she smiled as she opened the weathered book. The smile disappeared almost instantly. Nearly every page contained handwritten notes in Benjamin's precise script. Numbers, symbols, mechanical sketches, cryptic equations. It looked less like a novel and more like a coded notebook. Emily carefully flipped toward the final pages. Scratched into the inside cover were 5 numbers written darker than all the others. 742, 159, 31. She stared at them. They have to mean something. Just then, the shrill ringing of the old farmhouse telephone shattered the silence. Emily froze. She hadn't even realized the telephone line still worked. The ringing continued. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, she picked up the receiver. Hello? For several seconds, there was only static. Then a calm male voice spoke. Is this the Hayes residence? Emily tightened her grip. Who is this? I was actually hoping to speak with Emily Carter. Her pulse quickened. You already know who I am. The stranger chuckled softly. Your grandfather talked about you often. Emily's heart skipped. How did you know my grandfather? A very long time ago, the man replied. We worked together. She remained silent. The voice continued. I imagine you've begun exploring the house. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. His tone remained calm. The real question is, have you found what Benjamin left behind? Emily's breathing grew shallow. What exactly are you looking for? There was a brief pause. Then the stranger answered quietly. Not what? Whoever reaches it first. A cold chill ran down her spine. You've called the wrong number. She started to hang up. Emily. His voice stopped her. Your grandfather spent 40 years protecting something that many people would kill to possess. Silence. Be very careful who you trust. The line went dead. Emily slowly lowered the receiver back into its cradle. Every instinct told her the caller wasn't bluffing. Someone had been watching the farmhouse. Someone knew she had returned. Someone knew about Benjamin. Outside, darkness had settled across the property. The towering pine trees swayed violently in the evening wind. For the first time since arriving, the farmhouse no longer felt isolated. It felt surrounded. Emily quickly locked every door and pulled the curtains shut. She searched the kitchen until she found an old cast-iron skillet. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it made her feel slightly less defenseless. Minutes later, she climbed back into the attic. The mysterious phone call had erased every trace of hesitation. Whatever Benjamin had hidden, she had to find it before someone else did. She placed the old pocket watch beside the wooden chest and stared once more at the mysterious numbers. 742, 159, 31. Suddenly, her eyes shifted toward the stopped watch. The hands were frozen forever at 7:42. Emily's heart raced. Wait. She looked back and forth between the watch and the numbers. Not 7, 4, 2 separately. 7:42? With trembling fingers, she aligned the brass rings into a completely different sequence. 742, 159, 31. For one long second, nothing happened. Then, Click. A soft, metallic sound echoed inside the chest. Emily held her breath. Slowly, she lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on dark blue velvet, lay 3 carefully preserved items. A thick, leather-bound journal, a rolled set of yellowed blueprints tied with faded ribbon, and an old black-and-white photograph showing Benjamin standing beside several serious-looking scientists in front of a modern research facility Emily had never seen before. With trembling hands, she opened the journal. The very first page contained only one handwritten sentence. For my granddaughter Emily, when the truth finally finds you, trust no one. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. In that single moment, she realized one terrifying truth. Her grandfather hadn't simply left her an inheritance. He had left her a secret powerful enough to put her life and the life of her unborn child in unimaginable danger. Emily barely slept that night. The leather journal rested on the nightstand beside the old pocket watch. Yet she couldn't bring herself to open it again. Every time she closed her eyes, the anonymous caller's warning echoed through her mind. Be very careful who you trust. Outside, the wind rattled the farmhouse windows while rain tapped softly against the roof. For years, she had believed her grandfather had lived a quiet, ordinary life after retiring to the countryside. Now that image was beginning to crumble. At sunrise, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the house. Emily frowned. She hadn't made coffee. Slowly, she made her way downstairs, one hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. Standing in the kitchen was Margaret Harper, calmly frying bacon as though she had always belonged there. The elderly woman turned with a warm smile. I figured you could use a proper breakfast. Emily blinked in surprise. How did you get inside? Margaret reached into her cardigan and held up a tarnished brass key. Benjamin gave me this years ago. He told me only to use it if you ever came home. And if you needed someone. Emily stared at the key. So, Grandpa expected this. Margaret nodded without hesitation. He expected you over breakfast. Emily finally gathered the courage to reveal what she had discovered. She placed the leather journal, the blueprint, and the faded photograph on the kitchen table. Margaret's expression immediately changed. She recognized them. You've opened the chest. Emily slowly nodded. And someone called me last night. Margaret stopped eating. What did he say? He knew I was here. He knew about Grandpa. He asked if I'd found what Benjamin left behind. The elderly woman's face turned pale. They've been waiting. Margaret folded her hands together before speaking. For decades. She walked toward the living room window, carefully checking the empty driveway before lowering her voice. After Benjamin disappeared back in the 70s, strangers began showing up around town. They claimed they represented research companies. Some said they were investors. Others never gave names at all. But they all asked the same questions. Did Arthur... Margaret caught herself and smiled sadly. I still call him Arthur sometimes. She shook her head. Did Benjamin ever bring anything back with him? Emily looked confused. Bring back what? I never knew. But whatever it was, they were desperate to find it. Margaret reached into her large canvas bag and carefully removed a thick manila envelope filled with old newspaper clippings. I've kept these for years. In case this day ever came. Emily spread the yellowed articles across the table. The headlines immediately caught her attention. Local engineer vanishes during private energy project. Scientist returns after 3-year disappearance. Independent inventor claims breakthrough in clean energy. Corporation denies industrial espionage allegations. Another article showed a younger Benjamin standing beside sophisticated laboratory equipment. He looked confident. Proud. Nothing like the gentle old man Emily remembered teaching her to fish at the nearby lake. Tears filled her eyes. I never knew any of this. Margaret smiled gently. He never wanted you to… Why? Because he wanted you to have a normal childhood. Emily silently picked up another article. The date was nearly 50 years old. A photograph showed Benjamin walking out of a government building surrounded by reporters. He looked exhausted, almost frightened. He was famous for a little while. Then he disappeared. Emily looked up. I thought Grandpa spent those years on some research expedition. Margaret slowly shook her head. That's what everyone was told. But it wasn't the truth. Emily's heartbeat quickened. What really happened? Margaret hesitated for several seconds. My late husband worked security for one of the companies involved. He wasn't allowed to tell me much. But before he died, he admitted Benjamin didn't disappear willingly. Emily stared at her. What do you mean? Margaret swallowed hard. He believed Benjamin was being kept somewhere against his will. The room fell silent. Emily could hear only the ticking of the old wall clock. The realization struck her with unexpected force. Her grandfather hadn't abandoned his family for 3 years. He hadn't chosen isolation. He had been trapped. Every childhood memory suddenly looked different. Benjamin's reluctance to discuss the past. The locked rooms. The coded books. The strange puzzles. The endless reminders never to trust strangers. None of it had been eccentric behavior. It had been survival. Emily slowly opened the journal again. This time she didn't see mysterious equations or complicated diagrams. She saw fear. Every page reflected a man trying desperately to protect something and someone. The deeper she read, the more Benjamin transformed before her eyes. He was no longer simply the kind old grandfather who baked pies and repaired radios. He was a brilliant engineer, forced to spend decades hiding from powerful people willing to destroy lives for what he had created. For years, Emily had believed she was the victim of the greatest tragedy in her family. She had lost her husband, lost her home, lost her future. But now she realized Benjamin had sacrificed almost his entire life carrying a burden no one else even knew existed. He had lived with secrets, with fear, with constant vigilance, and somehow, he had still found enough love to give his granddaughter the happiest childhood she could remember. Emily gently closed the journal and wiped away a tear. I understand now. Margaret looked at her carefully. Understand what? Emily looked around the quiet farmhouse. This house isn't just an inheritance. It isn't just land. It's the reason Grandpa spent 40 years looking over his shoulder. She placed one hand protectively over her unborn daughter. And now, she looked directly at the hidden attic staircase. It's my responsibility. Margaret gave a slow, approving nod. I was hoping you'd say that. Before Emily could answer, both women heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching across the gravel driveway. A black luxury sedan rolled slowly towards the farmhouse. Neither woman recognized the vehicle, but both immediately knew the past had finally arrived at Benjamin Hayes' front door. Emily's pulse quickened as the black luxury sedan came to a stop in front of the farmhouse. Through the lace curtains, she watched 2 sharply dressed men step out with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to getting exactly what they wanted. Margaret didn't have to say a word. Emily already knew who they were. They found us, she whispered. Margaret's expression hardened. I was hoping we'd have another day. The older woman gently guided Emily away from the front windows. Remember something, child? Powerful people rarely ask twice. A firm knock echoed through the house. Then another. Miss Carter, a calm male voice, called. We'd appreciate a few minutes of your time. Emily looked toward the hidden staircase leading to the attic. The journal, the blueprints, and the photograph were still lying exactly where she had left them. She hurried upstairs, tucked everything back inside the wooden chest, and carefully slid the false wall panel into place. By the time she returned downstairs, the knocking had become more persistent. Taking a deep breath, She opened the front door only a few inches, leaving the security chain fastened. Standing outside were two men dressed in tailored charcoal suits. One appeared to be in his early 40s with calm, observant eyes. The other, older and silver-haired, wore an expensive smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Emily Carter?" the younger man asked politely. "Who's asking?" He produced a sleek business card. "My name is Victor Lawson. This is my colleague, Edward Collins. We represent NovaGen Technologies." Emily accepted neither the card nor the introduction. "What do you want?" Edward stepped forward with practiced confidence. "We understand you've recently inherited this property." "I'm not interested in selling." Edward smiled. "You haven't even heard our offer." "I don't need to." For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Victor sighed. "We're authorized to offer $5 million. Emily blinked. The amount was staggering, far beyond anything the old farmhouse could possibly be worth. Edward continued smoothly. "Cash? No inspections. No delays. We'll even help you relocate wherever you'd like." Emily folded her arms. "Why would anyone pay $5 million for a neglected farmhouse?" The two men exchanged a brief glance. Victor answered carefully. "Your grandfather completed several consulting projects for our company many years ago. We believe there may still be documents on the property that belong to us." Emily's heartbeat remained steady despite the lie. "My grandfather never mentioned your company." Edward smiled again. "I'm sure there were confidentiality agreements involved." Margaret suddenly stepped beside Emily. "Benjamin Hayes never worked for NovaGen." Both men looked toward the elderly woman. Edward's smile faded almost imperceptibly. "And you are?" "A neighbor. A very old one." Silence stretched between them. Emily noticed Victor quietly studying the farmhouse instead of the conversation. His eyes lingered on the windows. The attic. The old barn. Every detail. He wasn't admiring the property. He was mapping it. Edward cleared his throat. "Our offer is extremely generous. In fact, we're prepared to increase it." He paused deliberately. $7 million? Emily almost laughed. Now there was no doubt. Whatever Benjamin had hidden beneath this farmhouse was worth far more than money. She slowly shook her head. "The answer is still no." Edward's pleasant expression finally disappeared. "Miss Carter, I think you should consider your circumstances." His eyes briefly lowered toward her pregnant stomach. A young woman raising a child alone faces many uncertainties. The implication was unmistakable. It wasn't concern, it was a warning. Emily instinctively placed one hand over her unborn daughter. "My child isn't for sale. Neither is this house." Victor quickly stepped between them, softening the atmosphere. "We apologize if this conversation has made you uncomfortable." He carefully placed the business card on a small table beside the door. "If you change your mind." Call me." Emily closed the door without another word. Through the front window, she watched the two men walk back toward their sedan. But they didn't leave. Instead, Victor slowly circled the farmhouse, pretending to admire the architecture while discreetly photographing every side of the property with his phone. Edward examined the ground near the old barn before disappearing briefly behind the woodshed. Margaret frowned. "They're not looking at the house. They're looking for a way in?" Nearly 20 minutes passed before the sedan finally disappeared down the gravel road. Only then did Emily allow herself to breathe. "They know," she whispered. Margaret nodded. "They've known for years." Emily picked up Victor's business card from the table. A strange metallic emblem shimmered beneath the company logo. A stylized phoenix formed from interlocking geometric lines. Her heart skipped. She had seen that exact pattern before. It matched the intricate carvings surrounding the locking mechanism on Benjamin's wooden chest. Not similar. Identical. She raced upstairs and opened the hidden compartment once more. Holding the business card beside the chest confirmed her suspicion. "The same symbol," The same design, the same organization. Benjamin hadn't carved those patterns himself. He had copied or escaped from the people who created them. At that moment, Emily realized something even more important. For days she had believed she had inherited an old farmhouse filled with mysteries. She was wrong. She had inherited Benjamin Hayes's unfinished mission. His hidden laboratory. His decades of research. His enemies. But she had also inherited something far more valuable than any scientific discovery. She now possessed proof that powerful people were terrified of what her grandfather had left behind. And if they were willing to offer $7 million without even entering the house, then whatever waited beneath the farmhouse wasn't merely valuable, it had the power to change the future. Emily looked toward the cellar door at the end of the hallway, remembering the strange blueprint hidden inside the chest. For the first time, she noticed faint pencil markings she had overlooked before. The drawing didn't end at the basement. It continued downward, much deeper underground. She unfolded the blueprint across the kitchen table. Margaret leaned over beside her, studying the faded lines. After several moments, the elderly woman whispered the words that changed everything. "Emily, I don't think your grandfather built a cellar." She pointed to a section labeled only with a single handwritten word. "Laboratory." Emily slowly looked toward the floor beneath her feet. The opportunity her grandfather had left behind was no longer hidden inside an old chest. It was buried directly beneath the farmhouse, waiting for the only person Benjamin had ever trusted to uncover it. Emily stood motionless, staring at the blueprint spread across the kitchen table. The single handwritten word laboratory seemed to pulse beneath the dim light. For days she had been running from grief, fear, and uncertainty. Now she understood there was nowhere left to run. Her grandfather had entrusted her with something extraordinary, and for the first time since Nathan's death, Emily realized she wasn't merely trying to survive. She had a purpose. Margaret gently folded the blueprint. "We shouldn't wait." Emily looked up. "If Novagen knows about the house, they'll come back." "They won't stop." "Neither will I," Emily thought. Taking a deep breath, she picked up an old lantern from the pantry. Although electricity still worked in most of the farmhouse, the blueprint suggested that the underground chamber had been sealed decades earlier. If it still existed, it would likely be in complete darkness. Together, Emily and Margaret carried flashlights, rope, bottled water, and a small toolbox down into the basement. The cellar smelled of damp earth and aged timber. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty canning jars, rusted tools, and forgotten furniture. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But Emily remembered the strange measurements marked on the blueprint. She counted each support beam carefully. 1, 2, 3. By the 7th beam, she stopped. "This wall shouldn't be here." Margaret walked beside her. "What do you mean?" "The blueprint shows another room." Emily tapped on the stone wall with the handle of a hammer. "Solid." She moved several feet farther. Tapped again. This time, the sound was different. Hollow. Her pulse quickened. Working together. They pulled away old wooden shelves that had clearly been positioned to hide part of the wall. Beneath decades of dust appeared a heavy steel door, almost perfectly disguised behind stacked stone. Unlike the wooden chest upstairs, this door featured no keyhole. Only a circular metal plate engraved with the same geometric phoenix symbol. Emily removed Benjamin's pocket watch from her jacket. The symbol on its cover matched perfectly. She slowly pressed the watch against the center of the plate. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the mechanism vibrated. A series of deep metallic clicks echoed behind the wall. Rust fell from the ceiling. Ancient gears groaned back to life. With surprising smoothness, the massive steel door slid sideways, releasing a rush of cool, stale air that had been trapped underground for decades. Margaret gasped. My God. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness below. Emily switched on her flashlight. I have to see this! You shouldn't go alone. I'm not. Carefully, the two women descended the stone steps. The deeper they traveled, the cooler the air became. Finally, the staircase opened into an enormous underground chamber. Emily stopped in complete amazement. The laboratory looked as though its owner had simply walked away yesterday. Long workbenches stretched across the room. Shelves overflowed with notebooks, engineering prototypes, and carefully labeled containers. Old computer terminals sat beneath protective covers. Blueprints covered entire walls. Rows of filing cabinets stood untouched beneath a thin layer of dust. In one corner rested an enormous machine unlike anything Emily had ever seen. It consisted of polished copper coils, thick glass cylinders, and dozens of interconnected mechanical components arranged around a circular platform. It looks impossible, she whispered. Margaret slowly shook her head. Benjamin built all this. Emily walked toward the nearest workbench. Framed photographs covered one shelf. She picked up the first. Benjamin stood beside a group of scientists. Everyone wore identical badges displaying the same phoenix emblem now used by Nova Gene. The second photograph showed Benjamin receiving an engineering award from a government official. The third changed everything. It showed Benjamin standing with a much younger Nathan. Emily stared in disbelief. Nathan couldn't have been older than 12. He was smiling proudly while Benjamin rested a hand on his shoulder. Tears filled Emily's eyes. Nathan knew. Margaret stepped closer. He visited here. Emily slowly turned the photograph over. Benjamin had written only one sentence on the back. One day, he will help protect what matters most. Emily's hands trembled. Nathan had never mentioned this laboratory. Never mentioned visiting Benjamin. Never mentioned the phoenix symbol. Suddenly, dozens of forgotten memories returned. Nathan insisting they spend holidays at the farmhouse. Nathan quietly repairing Benjamin's roof every autumn. Nathan encouraging Emily to reconnect with her grandfather after years apart. He hadn't been doing those things out of simple kindness. He had been keeping a promise. Emily sat down, overwhelmed. I thought I knew my husband. Margaret placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Perhaps you knew the part he wanted you to know. Emily nodded slowly. And he was protecting me. As she wiped away her tears, her eyes landed on an old reel-to-reel recorder sitting neatly on Benjamin's desk. A handwritten note rested beside it. For Emily. Her heart pounded. She carefully threaded the tape through the machine and pressed play. Static crackled for several seconds. Then Benjamin's familiar voice filled the silent laboratory. Emily, if you're hearing this, then I was right. She covered her mouth. Hearing his voice again felt almost unbearable. First, I need you to know how proud I have always been of you. If circumstances forced you to find this place, then life has already asked more of you than anyone should endure. Emily's tears flowed freely. You may believe this laboratory contains my greatest achievement. It doesn't. My greatest achievement was making sure you grew up far away from the people who wanted to control my work. Knowledge without compassion becomes a weapon. Never allow anyone to convince you that scientific progress matters more than human life. The recording paused briefly before Benjamin continued. Nathan understood that lesson. He chose to protect you instead of helping those who financed this project. Emily's breathing stopped. Nathan hadn't died by chance. Had he? Benjamin's voice became heavier. If Nathan is no longer with you, then events unfolded exactly as I feared. Emily looked at Margaret, whose face had gone completely pale. The recording continued. Listen carefully, Emily. Nathan's accident may not have been an accident. The words struck like a bolt of lightning. Every assumption Emily had carried for months shattered instantly. The police report, the unanswered questions, the missing surveillance footage, the rushed investigation. None of it suddenly made sense anymore. Benjamin's final words echoed through the laboratory. You are no longer running from your past. You are protecting the future. Emily slowly stood. The frightened widow who had arrived at the farmhouse days earlier no longer existed. In her place stood a determined woman with a mission far greater than herself. She gently placed both hands over her unborn daughter. I promise you, Grandpa. Then she looked toward the hidden elevator shaft at the far end of the laboratory, a feature that wasn't marked anywhere on the blueprint. I'll finish what you started. At that very moment, somewhere above the farmhouse, the faint sound of engines echoed through the forest. Novikun had returned. But this time, Emily was ready. The sound of engines rumbled above the hidden laboratory like distant thunder. Emily looked toward the reinforced ceiling, every instinct telling her the people from Nova Gen had returned sooner than expected. But unlike the frightened woman who had driven to the farmhouse only days earlier, she no longer felt powerless. Benjamin's voice still echoed inside her mind. You are protecting the future. She carefully removed the tape from the recorder and slipped it into her backpack alongside the journal, the blueprints, and the old photographs. We have to leave, Margaret whispered. Emily slowly shook her head. No. Margaret stared at her. If we run now, they'll keep chasing us. They'll never stop. So what are you going to do? Emily smiled for the first time since Nathan's death. I'm going to finish what Grandpa and Nathan started. She walked toward the enormous workbench and continued searching through Benjamin's files. Hidden inside one of the locked drawers was a thick envelope marked Final Evidence. Inside were dozens of documents. Signed contracts, private correspondence, financial records, research agreements. More importantly, there were copies of internal reports proving that Novagen had secretly attempted to seize Benjamin's clean energy invention decades earlier. The files described illegal surveillance, stolen research, bribery, and repeated efforts to silence anyone who refused to cooperate. Near the bottom of the envelope rested a sealed flash drive. Benjamin had written only 6 words across its label. The truth belongs to everyone. Emily understood immediately. This wasn't simply about protecting an invention. It was about exposing corruption that had remained hidden for generations. Suddenly, the laboratory lights flickered. A loud metallic crash echoed from somewhere above. They're inside, Margaret whispered. Emily quickly searched the room until she found another handwritten map attached to the underside of Benjamin's desk. Unlike the first blueprint, this one revealed an emergency exit leading through an abandoned mining tunnel beneath the mountain. Benjamin had planned for this. He had always known someone might eventually come. The 2 women hurried through the narrow passage, carrying only the evidence Benjamin had specifically prepared for Emily. Behind them, heavy footsteps echoed through the laboratory entrance. Voices shouted. Metal doors slammed. Someone had discovered the hidden chamber. But they were already too late. After nearly 20 minutes of climbing through the underground tunnel, a faint beam of daylight appeared ahead. Emily pushed open a rusted steel hatch concealed beneath thick bushes nearly half a mile from the farmhouse. Fresh mountain air filled her lungs. For the first time in months, she felt free. Margaret smiled. Benjamin thought of everything. Emily looked back toward the distant farmhouse, standing peacefully among the towering pine trees. He wasn't protecting a building. He was protecting the truth. Several weeks later, the story dominated national headlines. Benjamin's evidence had been delivered simultaneously to federal investigators, multiple independent journalists, and several scientific organizations. No single company could suppress it. No single official could bury it. Within days, authorities launched criminal investigations into Novagen's executives. Decades of corruption, corporate espionage, and financial crimes began unraveling one document at a time. Victor Lawson agreed to testify after realizing his employers intended to make him the fall guy. Edward Collins disappeared before he could be arrested. Government investigators officially reopened Nathan Brooks's fatal car accident. This time, forensic specialists uncovered evidence that had somehow been ignored during the original investigation. His vehicle's braking system had been deliberately sabotaged. Nathan had not died because of bad weather. He had been murdered. Emily cried when she heard the news, not because it renewed her grief, but because it finally restored Nathan's honor. He had never betrayed Benjamin. He had died protecting the people he loved. Months later, those responsible faced criminal charges. Several executives received lengthy prison sentences. The stolen patents were returned to Benjamin Hayes's estate. His revolutionary clean energy technology, once hidden beneath a forgotten farmhouse, was transferred to an independent nonprofit research foundation dedicated to making it freely available for humanitarian purposes instead of corporate profit. Benjamin's lifelong dream finally became reality. 1 year later, the farmhouse looked completely different. Children laughed beneath the old maple tree where Emily had once played as a little girl. The neglected gardens bloomed with colorful wildflowers. The weathered porch had been restored without losing its rustic charm. A new wooden sign stood proudly near the front gate. The Benjamin Hayes Innovation Center. Young engineers, university students, and aspiring inventors now visited every summer to study renewable technology, ethical scientific research, and the importance of protecting knowledge for the benefit of humanity. Inside the restored study, Benjamin's journals filled a small museum dedicated to his life. His greatest inventions were displayed alongside photographs of the family he had sacrificed everything to protect. Emily smiled every time visitors stopped to read his story. Not because they admired his brilliance, but because they understood his courage. Across the room, a cheerful little girl with bright blue eyes ran toward her. "Mom." 3-year-old Lily threw her tiny arms around Emily's legs. "Grandpa Ben is on the wall again." Emily laughed softly before lifting her daughter into her arms. "Yes, he always will be." Lily looked curiously at Benjamin's portrait. "Was he a superhero?" Emily smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart. He was something even better. He was a good man who chose kindness when the world offered him power." Just then, the afternoon breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying the familiar scent of pine trees across the valley. Emily closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she could almost hear Benjamin's warm laughter and Nathan's gentle voice. Neither of them had lived long enough to see this day. But their love, their sacrifice, and their unwavering belief that truth should never belong to the powerful had changed countless lives. Emily looked towards the mountains glowing beneath the setting sun. She no longer saw the lonely road where she had arrived, heartbroken with nothing but a suitcase and fear. She saw home. She saw hope. She saw the future her grandfather had quietly built long before she ever understood his purpose. Holding Lily close, Emily whispered the words she wished Benjamin could hear. "We did it, Grandpa. We kept your promise." As the golden sunlight bathed the farmhouse in warmth, Emily realized that true legacies are never measured by wealth, fame, or recognition. They are measured by the lives we protect, the truth we defend, and the hope we leave behind for those who come after us. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by family, purpose, and peace, Emily understood that the greatest inheritance Benjamin Hayes had ever given her was not hidden beneath the farmhouse. It had been growing inside her all along. The courage to choose love over fear, the strength to protect what is right, and the wisdom to ensure that some treasures become more valuable only when they are shared with the world. Life has a way of changing our direction when we least expect it. Emily believed she had lost everything the day she drove away from the Brooks family estate with nothing but a suitcase and the child growing inside her. She thought her future had been stolen, her dreams had ended, and her life would forever be defined by grief. But sometimes, what feels like the end is actually the beginning of something far greater. Benjamin Hayes understood a truth that many people spend their entire lives searching for. Character is revealed not when life is easy, but when every reason to give up is placed in front of you. He could have used his extraordinary knowledge to become wealthy or powerful. Instead, he chose integrity. He chose to protect people rather than profit from them. That decision cost him years of peace. But it preserved something far more valuable: his conscience and his legacy. Emily inherited far more than a farmhouse or a hidden laboratory. She inherited courage, resilience, and the responsibility to do what was right, even when it was difficult. By choosing honesty over fear, justice over revenge, and hope over despair, she honored both her grandfather and her late husband in the most meaningful way possible. The greatest legacy we leave behind is never measured by money, status, or possessions. It is measured by the lives we touch, the values we pass on, and the courage we inspire in others. Every act of kindness, every honest decision, and every sacrifice made for those we love creates a ripple that can reach far beyond our own lifetime. When life closes one door, don't assume your story is over. Sometimes, the path you never planned becomes the one that leads to your greatest purpose. Call to action, CTA. If Emily's journey touched your heart, remember that courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, courage is simply choosing to keep moving forward when life feels impossible. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more inspiring stories filled with hope, resilience, and unforgettable life lessons. Most importantly, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when what seemed like your greatest loss eventually became your greatest blessing? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may encourage someone who is facing a difficult season right now. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter how dark the road may seem today, integrity, perseverance, and love will always light the way toward a better tomorrow.